Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Achint Sehgal. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering for Americas at OneTrust, and we're a privacy management software company. Personally oversee a team of about 56 SEs and growing by the day across all the lines of business at OneTrust. And just a quick background, I little less than 5 years back, I was hired as the first official SE at OneTrust. And going from being an individual contributor to the current state, from core business of privacy management to 7 different lines of business today, I personally have been very, very humbled to learn about, being a trusted advisor and developing trusted advisors. And I'll share a little bit of the journey with everyone today and really some on the ground tactical practices that we have implemented in reaching that scale. I think yesterday, as we kicked off the summit, everyone saw the theme of trust coming up in various conversations between the CRO, between the SE leadership, between organizations. So trust really, really matters to organizations today. And I want to share with you a little bit about a research that I found really interesting. Edelman Research Group has been working on the theme of trust for the last 20 years. And every year they release, updated research around what does trust mean in the world today. And you'll see very interesting things. When people think about brands, some of the top criteria outside of product attributes and the quality is that they want to be able to trust the organization they're working with. In the B2B sales world, that directly translates into how we interact with the audience, how the SE function works with the audience. And unsurprisingly, they also found out that a vast majority of organizations either lose trust or gain trust based on the kind of interaction that occurs. People that are talking about a product, that they have a personal experience, they have some sort of industry expertise, a peer-to-peer conversation, which means if I'm a sales or a solutions engineer or a solution architect, and I share best practices, well, those best practices have to come from somewhere, credibly. What are other organizations doing as part of that? So this is not surprising to us. It just puts it into a more contextual frame for everyone. And as they looked at, who becomes a credible spokesperson for an organization, in the top 3 items, we'll say industry expert and technical expertise are right there. That's literally our solution engineers. We are industry experts. We understand the domain, the solutioning, the industry, the asks in the market, and we become technical experts on the brand that we represent. So all of this is to say that the boiled down version of this is some very interesting insights that this research shows us conclusively. It reveals interesting buying patterns. There's higher premiums that organizations are willing to pay and people are willing to pay, and loyalty that people share, the type of data that they're willing to share with customers, with other organizations, 5x more advocacy, which means, not only am I willing to work with you, but also I'm willing to advocate for you in the market and in the space and in the industry. And, 4x more consideration, getting 4x shot at doing a POC, getting 4x shot at doing the next demonstration, the next technical conversation. And 14% of these organizations said, they become closer to higher purchasing. So just increased purchasing. At the forefront of the B2B sales processes, literally at the bleeding edge is where the SE sat. The SE team is literally one of the first teams that interacts with the audience. So the SEs, the SE management, we have to become the very embodiment of trust itself for our customers. Now, what does that mean for us? In the context of what we learned, we saw that upskilling the SEs down to fine skill sets so that they remain trusted in today's environment and that we continue to directionally align their trustworthiness for the future is critical. So it really, really matters how we think about trust in terms of the solution engineering, the sales engineering, the pre-sales role within organizations. Now, I'll ask you a question, and maybe Naz, I'll ask you this question. On my screen, what is it that you see? What do you notice on my screen here? I have a picture of my bicycle wheel. So what do you see on that?
Well, I see a bicycle wheel for sure. I also see a broken spoke, and looks like it's maybe fall because I see an orange leaf by the wheel.
Yeah, very observant. Now, in my SE trainings and my SE management and leadership trainings, I've often started by showing this picture and asking the SEs the same question. And like Naz, you just said, we'll get a series of responses. The wheels, the gears, someone who's as observant as you will understand it's, from fall, looking at that leaf. Almost everyone calls out that broken spoke. So, my next question then is, Naz, does the broken spoke matter that you notice?
It depends. I'm not a biker, so this bike would be in the garage for the most part, so maybe not as much.
Okay, yeah. And, as we can imagine, everyone has a thought and opinion about it. It may not matter if you're not a somebody who's into cycling. So I often rephrase myself and I ask the question, do I trust this wheel, right? And to the audience, right, this is something to think about, right? Does, one thing that's out of order, does that matter at all? And the response to that is always very contextual, right? If I'm going to go for a ride around the neighborhood park, maybe it does not matter. It does matter, though, if I'm going to go participate in Tour de France, right? So it matters. The trust factor of the wheel in this case is now correlated to what is it that we are up to and the intended result of that. We could also assert then that the trustworthiness of an SE is directly correlated to what the SE organization is up to. What are the goals, the KPIs, the famously set OKRs, the infamously untracked OKRs in the SE organization, and so on. So trust in that sense just became very tangible, right? It's now correlated to something physical, something that's tangible for an organization. So, for us, what does that mean then? Well, classically, trust is defined as a belief in the reliability, the truth, the ability or the strength of something or someone, right? In the SE world, how do we correlate that, right? So Edelman research, again, we adapted this from the research that was looking at trust. They saw that at the organizational level, that the power of trust became a very key indicator. And it's not just like reputation of a company or an individual or a team or the favorability of a team, which are typically backward-looking metrics, right? You look at the past performance. Trust implies a dynamic projection. You start to bet on, that the stakeholders' place in trusting that the organization, the team, the pre-sales team, the professional services, the customer services teams will deliver against their positive expectations. So trust has become this focal point in how we view everything, from the brands that we purchase from, to the advertisements that we see, when we're browsing the internet, to the usage of our own data across organizations, to, the societal issues that we want our organizations to take a stand for, and our view of organizational leadership. But trust is also not this mythical, plasmatic thing that, cannot be reached. We found in our growth and, personally in my journey, that trust became a function of tactical practices. So, from this point onwards, for the next few minutes, I'm going to go from 30,000 foot skydive right into ground zero on what is it on the ground that we can do with our SEs and our SE management team that helps us make trust a very tactical and a very tangible thing, right? So let's look at a little bit about, different segments, the ability, which, in the way we thought about this is the customer facing side of things for an SE organization. The perception that an SE is really good at what they do. So we'll go right in. If an SE or an SE leader is interacting with a prospect or a customer, what are some tactical practices that enable us to, really match those up to being a trusted advisor? Now, no surprise, everyone's probably experienced, or everyone here has probably done demos that were stellar, where the audience came away, being ultra clear on the value proposition, or they came away really understanding why they should be using your tooling, or they came away understanding that this is the right team to work with. And part of that is the way interaction happens in a demonstration or in a technical conversation. So what are some on the ground things that could make demonstrations a bi-directional conversation? Now, in our organization, something that we started to take on was to do mock sessions between SEs. And we would find opportunities across different teams and really have the SEs go through a product segment, a part of the product, or a certain demonstration that they would do. So starting with the very basics, even though an account executive may have set up the agenda, the customers come in with some expectation, always confirming, what's top of mind, because things change last moment. Internet outages occur last moment, right? So always confirming the agenda for the audience. And just, making sure that we are planning to cover X, Y, Z things. Mr. Customer, is there something else that is top of mind for you, or something that you heard so far that we can incorporate in the conversation, right? So let's settle and make sure everyone is aligned and they're not holding back on something. Right? So confirming the agenda, and even that small practice becomes critical for somebody. Something that we think of in terms of discovery. Discovery is a very interesting topic in the pre-sales world. And it can go in all dimensions, everything from, a questionnaire that an SE needs to run through, or something that an account executive sends beforehand to customers, or a checklist that we expect our SEs or the SE leaders to go through in a conversation. But if we find the right spots, make discovery an organic factor in all of these, that makes for a very simple bi-directional conversation. So the way we thought about this was literally in our demo scripts, finding the right places to pause and ask very specific questions. Customer, I showed you XYZ. What kind of tooling do you use for maybe managing workflows? A tactical example. Or customer, I walked you through XYZ product. In your organization, what type of teams are typically involved in this? Now, I'm sharing very specific examples. These could obviously be very, very different in your organization, depending on the product that your SEs work on, et cetera. But finding those strategic spots, and this becomes relevant when you have net new SEs. We expect and we understand that seasoned SEs and leaders understand how this dynamic works. But making that a tangible practice becomes very critical. And we also found that having people interact in a very skillful fashion. Every time I'm presenting something or an SE is doing a demonstration and we pause, maybe we are trying to ask a question, or I have multiple stakeholders on a conversation, I want to make sure that every person walks away feeling validated. Every person walks away feeling like they have something, they have skin in the game and they have a voice. And if we can become that trusted advisor, in today's ecosystem, sometimes you only get a single shot, a single presentation, and multiple stakeholders. So if we can train our SEs to be able to interact very skillfully with the audience, to land as a trusted advisor within that 1 hour shot that they get every single time, that's critical. And it's basic things. When I say something, I'll start by saying, Naz, do you see how this works in your team? Right. So addressing the audience by the name based on the introductions that occurred at the beginning of the call, understanding what a person's role may be and how what I'm showing to them impacts them. So those are some just practical things that we asked our SEs to take on and go through mock practices of doing this. And something that we found was a game changer was effective closing questions. So I would ask every SE, what is it that we should say at the end of, a demonstration? A classic thing is to say, audience, do you have any questions? Well, the answer to that can be very binary. It may not tell me anything. But if I ask very specific things, did I miss something in the agenda today that was important to you? Is there something that you saw through the presentation that piqued your interest and we should focus more on? Is there something that you've seen outside of our organization that we did not address for you today? Those are things that can reopen the discovery phase, even at the end of a demonstration. So highly critical, like I said, all the way from 30,000 foot view, I've gotten into on ground zero. What is it that an SE does in these practices? Now, our SEs spend a lot of time interacting with audiences. Even though we have automation tools and video capability, majority of our SE time lands up in interaction. So even replying to basic questions, how an SE responds, pausing for a moment when a question is asked, allowing the audience to complete their thought and letting them recollect their thoughts, restating something back to the audience so that the audience understands that you understood what they said, and then coming with a very clear and a direct response to the question. So we found it interesting. I would ask in these mock sessions with SEs how they might respond to competitive questions, for example, right? And everybody just wants to jump in and say, why the product is the best. Why should somebody use our product, and just be very passionate about that. But pausing for a moment, restating what the customer said, and then responding back to those things helps validate what the question was, and the direct response then hopefully clarifies for the audience, what was asked. And in this response section, we also found a lot of times, people would just say yeses or nos to things without a lot of, contextual layer. So if I were to, were asked a question, does your work tool provide workflow capabilities for parallel responses? As an example, the way we worked with our teams was to always start by providing a very crisp and a direct response, which would give a very clear answer to the audience. But a lot of times we'll find, we need to talk about workarounds on things that don't exist in a product today. We also have to overlay things with context of why am I telling you what I'm telling you? So I would, see SEs respond in terms of, I've had other customers ask about this, about multiple approvals in parallel. Today in our tooling, an individual can manage their tasks and then they can forward the assessment package to somebody else. By the way, I'm happy to take your feedback because I've also heard it from other customers, and I'll take it back to my product management teams and we'll ask them to prioritize this feature set, and I will keep you updated on where we are. So now I've just converted a yes or no response to what do we do today? How can you accomplish things? And what am I going to do for you on an ongoing basis? But so that dramatically just shifts the way a response lands on somebody. Now, we also saw in the organization, SEs spend a vast majority of their time interacting with people. And if you have noticed so far in my conversation, a lot of times to connect my sentences, I use the word or ah, and that's my filler word. in between sentences. So, Naz, let me maybe ask you, have you noticed what your filler word is when you are connecting sentences? And have you seen any way of getting rid of that sort of filler word?
Actually, it's actually technically. Yeah, how to get rid of them. I think some of the things that I learned early on was to gather my thoughts and speak slowly sometimes, because that forces you to be clear in your statements and gets your thought across without filler words. Easier said than done.
I hear you. So I heard you say, slow down a little bit, gather the thoughts, and speak slowly so you're able to connect sentences in a better way and you're cognizant of the filler word not being used in your sentences a lot. Yeah. Now, food for thought for everyone on the line is, what if we could help our SCs identify what their own filler words are? And if we could put any tactical or tangible practices in place that help them reduce or even get rid of that. Now, I don't have objective data yet to say that taking out a filler word reduces the sales cycle by X days, or it increases the ARR or the ACV or the TCV by Y amount of dollars. However, we do find that SEs come off highly confident, they're articulate, the messaging is clearer, and SEs become excited about their demo delivery. Everybody loves excited. Nobody likes dull. So in a demonstration, if we can include a simple practice where the SEs can get rid of these filler words that all of us have, right? Kind of, basically, technically, I mean, actually, that, all of these things. What we tried out was utilizing a visual medium. So I asked our SEs to put a post-it note and write down what their filler word was and stick it on their monitors. Now, there's a lot of research that shows that you can do visual practices that help you take out a practice or establish a new practice. This was one of the ways that we tried out. There can obviously be other methods, but this one simple practice can dramatically alter and really elevate the quality of delivery of a demonstration and a conversation, right? Now, moving on, outside of just filler words, responding to questions, in the pre-sales world, handling objections is also a big thing. And I say a big thing because each of us, every single interaction that we go through, will run into some sort of an objection that comes up. Everything from, your competitor said you do not do X, Y, Z. Why should I choose your organization or your product over, X competitor? We don't have the resources to implement. We are a lean team, so I don't foresee that we can implement your product, or your product is too complicated, and so on. Each of us go through this, right? Something that we did was we did a rapid fire training for the SE team. We just called it rapid fire because we literally picked up the known use cases. I charged our SE managers to just start noting down the practical use cases that the SEs were hearing and the questions that were being asked by our audience and our prospects. And in this rapid fire training, all we did was we said, okay, here is an example of what a customer says. How do we respond to this, right? So this is no different than the way we would respond to something. It starts by just the curiosity to listen to something. Why does the prospect care about this question? Is this going to, make them look good to their boss if they were able to do X, Y, Z? Is this a person that's net new to the organization? And this is the first project that they have, and they're trying to be successful. So more than just a feature that someone's asking for, a type of product or certain requirement that they ask for, we got to start thinking about and listening to, what's the emotion behind this? So why does this person care about this? And then reframing that back. they've got to understand that we get what they're saying. I think we also have a deeper session on empathy, during the summit. So that's not disjointed from this conversation either. Validating somebody's concern, even though a lot of times we get asked questions that are very obvious to us, that seem very obvious in the context of the product or what we do as an organization, but it may not be obvious for somebody else. So validating someone's concern and demonstrating empathy can become critical in that sense. And differentiating, right? So customer, you said you care about parallel approvers. In your organization, who are the other people that get involved in this? And then what happens, when they provide an approval? Well, in our tooling today, we can do X, Y, Z, and here's how you accomplish that. So even though a concern or an objection might seem not as important to us, it is valid and important to the audience. So these are some on-the-ground practices that we saw. If we start to train the SEs on some of these basic things, that the quality of their demonstration dramatically alters. Now, the other area in establishing trust, we looked at the ability of an SE, the customer-facing side of things of an SE. Integrity is typically thought of as conviction that an individual or an SE is honest, some sort of a moral compass. A Harvard Business Review studies from the 90s talks about self-governance in accordance to a set of guiding principles. But in our organizations, what if we think about integrity as a function of consistent actions? Now, something that becomes a little philosophical, but it's interesting, is that Aristotle had a view that one becomes courageous by acting courageous. So what if we have practices that are consistently done or actions that are consistently taken by our SEs that naturally make them more credible, that naturally make them come off as people that understand things, or that they come off as integrous individuals? So everything from building credibility to the right types of follow-throughs. In our organization, we looked at how updating the demonstration flow and including very specific customer examples. Instead of me talking about industry best practice, why don't I just show the industry best practice and use credibility that way? So we had a net new SE start on our team. The first thing that we charged this individual with was to interview all the other SEs as part of her ramp-up period, and to start creating a customer use case library. Now I understand that's a very different thing for a team of 10, 15, 50 versus a team of 300 SEs. But let's think about the practice for just a moment. That allowed us to start figuring out, what did the pre-sales team do? We also interviewed our professional services team to understand, how did the professional services team and the customer success team deliver on this? What were the use cases we talked about? How did they get delivered? And then we started to curate these customer examples. Now, this extended into our demo engineering team, because at some point, the scale would not allow for us to do individual interviews or to shadow every single demo. So we charged our demo engineering team to start building an accessible library, a structured library for SEs to utilize. And then we institutionalized a practice that as part of a demonstration prep, an SE could access a use case library, and they would pick out a couple of examples that they would insert in their demonstrations. So that just became very tangible for every SE. So, food for thought again is, how do we enable our SEs so that integrity just becomes a natural thing that comes off? Part of it, when we say we're going to do X and we do X, that lands as integrous. So follow through became critical. And something that worked in our organization was, every single time we do a demonstration, an SE can send back, a short set of notes back to the prospect with maybe 1 to 2, call to actions. Nothing, huge, but also copy the SE manager on it. Now that becomes such a simple practice, but the audience can now begin to see that what they said, how they landed, what are the next steps. And that's outside of the kind of follow through you would have somebody from the sales team or the account executive team do. So a simple practice, but we saw how this made the SEs way more confident, how it made them trusted advisors for our customers. Now I'll pause again, and now I'll ask you another question. Have you yourself ever experienced just an extraordinary customer service interaction? And what was that like for you?
Yes, actually, one does come to mind. This was prior to I think the pandemic was just starting, and I had this amazing vacation booked. It was, I believe I was supposed to go to Mexico with my family. And obviously, the pandemic hit and things started getting stressful. So I decided to cancel the vacation. And it was two things. There was a hotel booked with one agency, and there was a flight booked through another. And I remember being on the phone with both of them, where one agency was basically like, well, sorry, according to your terms and conditions, we cannot cancel this right now. They put me on hold for half an hour. The second agency was, I understand. I have kids at home too. I wouldn't want you to put your kids and yourself in that situation. Let me go ahead and take care of it. You don't need to be on the call. Yeah. We'll send you an email. And they made it happen. So that really stood out to me. Just kind of the human connection, understanding what I was going to go through. So yeah.
Yeah. Human connection, understanding things happen, being flexible, really just pivoting, right? So, most of us are not in customer service. We're not taking these calls every day where we are working on trip cancellations. So why do I bring this up? The SE interaction is no different. When our prospects and customers interact with SEs, delivering on extraordinary interactions. And extraordinariness is not this wild concept. It really is just empathy. It's I said to you, I'm going to send you a white paper after the call. I sent you a white paper. You said you got to leave within 15 minutes of starting the meeting. Well, let me prioritize what's important to you. Or there are certain asks you have, and let's pivot the conversation to that. So these are things that just make for extraordinariness. And we don't expect to see that in every interaction. That's not how extraordinariness lands for everybody. So, people are looking for, did somebody just answer their questions clearly? Did somebody just go above and beyond? And did they follow up exactly like they said they would? And somebody may be angry, somebody may be demanding on a call, but we stayed polite, professional, validated the concerns, and moved on. So this is how our customers expect us to be in every interaction. So to the audience here, I'll maybe do a 10-second pause. You don't necessarily have to answer this, but think about a couple of actionable areas. 1 to 2 basic practices that you might institutionalize with your own teams, right? And things that you can coach your SEs on. You're welcome to put them in the Slack channel. If you want to memorialize them for yourself, you're welcome to obviously write them, but take a pause. Think about a couple of actionable areas that you can work with your SEs on. Now, beyond these things, in the area of an SE being dependable, the expectation that an SE will keep their promise, that they will come off as that trusted advisor. There's a lot of things that an SE does, right, to land as an expert. They have to understand the customer's persona. They have to do time management. They have to practice things. They have to do the research about the product, the industry, the market, the customer. They might need some sort of certifications. They have to do research and read things. They have to watch videos. They've got to Google stuff on the fly to look like they're experts on things. And they have to understand, the market needs. And they might have to shadow other people to understand how things actually get done. all of these things that an SE has to take on, just natural part of their role, are just part of underlying deliberate practice. Now, there's extensive research about, what is expertise, spending about 10,000 hours in a discipline that help you move towards expertise. The underlying thought process here is that there have to be specific things that the SE
Hey, Achint, I think we can't hear you anymore. So you may want to get those earphones out. But I love the topic that you were trying to discuss here, the whole concept of the SE being dependable. And I think there's some good chat going on as well. So if we have you back, maybe I can hand it off to you.
We do, I think so.
All right,
yes.
On my takeaways then later. So sounds like you're back.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. So, how does the SE leadership team think about enabling the SEs de facto to become dependable? In our organization, every time a net new SE joins the team, a structured boot camp, so they understand what are standard operating procedures, product dimensions, the demonstrations, POC processes, the sales cycle. And we have personally latched onto, a tooling that we use internally for onboarding boot camps, a structured 30, 60, 90-day goal for an SE that enables us to understand where in their SE journey they are, what are the areas that they need support with, and how do we, with agility, continue to orient them in a successful direction. Demonstration environments and demonstration scripts. We think of it as write it like you would say it, right? So literally writing down what is it that I'm going to say in a demonstration. So if we took, half a step back and the SE manager or a lead would take the time to come up with literally what is it that you say in a demonstration and have somebody practice. Now, this goes back to Aristotle's practice. Start doing those things so that you start getting to those things, right? And a North Star demo, right? Is there a Lamborghini of demos that an SE should experience, right? Every single time I have a net new SE and they sit in a Lamborghini or a Tesla, I want them to experience that ludicrous mode, right? You sit in a Tesla, you want to experience that ludicrous mode. There's got to be that North Star demo that an SE can learn from. And lastly, how do you enable, from a daily perspective, as an SE starts, what is it that they start doing every single day that actually helps them become dependable? So the shadowing loop with their buddies or SE managers, continuous feedback, and how do we make these things effective? So these are practices, but how does a practice become effective? So in our organization, we toyed around with a couple of things. Number one, note taking. And that just meant that we have a shared pool of notes that every SE has access to. So when I'm taking notes, it's searchable for my other SEs. When another SE takes notes, it's searchable for me, and actionable items. So literally, we run a session to show people how to take notes and what are the things that you capture. Daily and weekly reporting. When an SE starts in the organization, well, tell me, what was your highlight of the day? What is something that blocked you? How do we plan for the next day? Not to over administer, not to, I would say take this with a grain of salt because every organization region is different. But important to continue orienting them right away. Initial processes, right? Who do they reach out to in the organization that we create for the organization that way? Lastly, I'll share something that I think we started the day with, David mentioned about, where community effect comes, people get connected to purpose. So let's think about how an SE gets connected to purpose. How are they impacting their own growth, the organization's growth as such? And there can be a number of interfaces. Does the SE have an opportunity to give product feedback? Is there the right mechanism? The product messaging. Does the SE have the ability to influence how a demonstration is done? How do we make them de facto webinar speakers? So these are some on the ground practices. We in the organization right now are working on what is the quarterly training structures across all the lines of business at the beginning of the quarter, just establishing that structure and making it go live in that first week. So these are become that sort of trusted advisor. Now, executing in practice is a whole new ballgame, right? So we cannot boil the ocean day one. And something that we found interesting and have started to experiment with in our organization is this theory of marginal gains. What is a 1% gain in tiny, highly effective, right? So the question that I will leave you with is, in your organization, what is that one tiny area, right? The filler words, the demonstration, the note taking that you want to take on. And more importantly, for yourselves, what are small, tiny SE leadership areas where you can do the same? So we continue being trusted advisors and propagating that in the world. I'm going to pause here for the audience, a little bit of food for thought at the end. And Naz, I'll turn it back.
Thanks, Achint. And I think we're losing you towards the end a little bit, but I want to say amazing content, ludicrous mode. I've experienced that. And I'm not sure I'm ready for it. But other than that, just a couple notes for the audience here. I know there is a question as well. So Achint, while I summarize some of the things you said, what is the size of your SC, so your pre-sales versus your sales enablement teams?
Yeah, well, our Americas SE organization is just past 55 SEs. Globally, we are 100 plus SEs in the organization, and everything that we do, impacts global processes as well. In terms of ratios, I would say very different across different teams. The ratio size from an SE to AE perspective.
Achint, maybe we can take this question to the chat session then, but I think they were also curious about your enablement team ratios. So the team that's formally responsible for your pre-sales enablement versus your sales enablement.
Got it.
I will let you take that to the chat because we're at time, but I want to say, one of the comments from Matt B from CLM Gurus really stood out, which is, sometimes getting comfortable with the silence is so important when you use filler words. But Achint, just a ton of great stuff in your presentation, all the way from the 30,000 foot, like you said, to the basics on how do you actually, that's my filler word, there you go. But how do you take that and really implement it? So thanks so much. And also for me, the one thing that stood out was really finding out why does it matter? And I remind my SEs and SAs this continuously, which is when they tell me, hey, I had a great customer meeting and they're going to buy this, always pushing on, why do you think it matters to their business? Why do you think they would buy it? Why? And in most cases, turns out we do need to do more discovery. So thanks so much for joining us, Achint.